This is the BlackBerry Priv. I'm going to use this as my only phone for a week and...
What?
Hello? Why am I even doing this?
Man, this phone is dead.
Meow meow.
You know where this phone deserves to be? The trash.
I've been waiting to make this video for a while.
Wow.
Before I even talk about setting this phone up, let's talk about BlackBerry, how they went from being at the top to not even existing now. BlackBerry had this huge loyal fan base back in the day. They were the top choice for a lot of working professionals.
Is that BlackBerry?
They had this cult-like status symbol. I kid you not, it was a big deal to own a BlackBerry back in the day. And that BlackBerry cult was conveniently named Crackberry. What a nice name. They had this messaging platform called BBM where you had to have a BlackBerry to be a part of it. And BlackBerry had a huge focus on security. It sounds very similar to a fruit company.
Wow.
My first phone was a BlackBerry, to be very specific, the BlackBerry Torch 9860. In fact, one of my most popular videos when I started my channel was how to install Play Store on a BlackBerry. Why did I have this very long intro? I can't listen to myself.
Okay,
What's up with my accent? But where are they now? They're happily hanging out in the grave with HTC and LG. To keep it short and simple, one of their biggest reasons for their downfall is that they changed less towards the market. They famously stuck towards their proprietary BlackBerry OS and their QWERTY keyboards, which in itself were pretty good back then. But in 2011, Apple and Samsung were dominating the market with their touchscreen smartphones, and BlackBerry on the other hand had their business customers and diehard fans like Kim Kardashian. But by 2011, that market was quickly shrinking. It's not like BlackBerry didn't make touchscreen smartphones in 2011. They did, and they were pretty horrible, to be honest. So BlackBerry took it back to the drawing board, and in 2012, they did major overhauls to their hardware and software. And for the most part, they did a good job, but they were pretty late to the market. The BlackBerry Z10 was a new beginning for BlackBerry, but they were pretty late, and their new software barely had apps. Sounds similar to a company that made Windows, I mean these. Anyways, by 2013, BlackBerry was rapidly losing their market share. Even their diehard fans hated the BlackBerry Z10, and in a rare move, decided to release BBM to Android and iOS. It meant that those BlackBerry loyalists would be better off using an Android phone or an iPhone. So by 2015, BlackBerry dished their own operating system for Android, and their first Android phone was the BlackBerry Priv. Make no mistake, this was a good phone for its time. It had all the core elements of a BlackBerry but also ran Android while being very secure. BlackBerry didn't even allow you to root this phone, that's how secure it was. They have a whole page dedicated to it. This is the first Android phone that had no modding community behind it. You couldn't root the phone, there were no custom ROMs. This phone hit two birds with one stone, but by 2015, BlackBerry was irrelevant. Only hardcore crackberries bought this phone, and even that was a tiny minority. Sales figures point towards BlackBerry only selling 650,000 Privs, but most of them also returned the phone, so it's probably less than that. You know what's the sad part? My dad bought this phone when it came out, and he stopped using it in 10 months. Now that's concerning. But soon in 2016, BlackBerry stopped caring and licensed their phone business to TCL. They rebranded some Alcatel phones to BlackBerries. They then designed two more phones on their own, but nobody cared. And they were hyping up for a 5G phone under another partnership in 2020, but it never came out, and that's the last thing we ever heard about BlackBerry's phone business. As for what they're doing now, they've become a cybersecurity company making tools for companies like Ford. Okay, we got pretty sidetracked there. Let's get back to setting this phone up. It's gonna be easy, right? Wrong. I almost didn't want to make this video, that's how bad it is. Everything went smoothly initially. I could log into my Google account without any issues. Everything else seemed normal until I reached the home screen. I went to the Play Store and it just said server error. I've never seen this before. Now this phone runs Android 6, which is 9 years old at this point. The last security patch it got was from October 2017. Oh no. But most apps do still support Android 6. So I tried to manually update the Play Store through the Play Store settings, and it thinks it's up to date. The next best way to update anything on an Android phone is obviously with APKs. I searched for the Play Store APK on APK Mirror only for the browser to be pretty out of date. I somehow found an APK, tried to install it, and I was stuck on the installing page for about 20 minutes. Trust me, this problem's gonna hunt me down once again. So I used ADP to push the update to the phone, which seemed to work. The Play Store finally started working, and I let every single app on the phone to update since everything is out of date. This phone has a few interesting pre-installed apps. Yahoo Finance is probably the only bloatware that exists. I just disabled half of the pre-installed apps because most of them are depreciated apps or useless ones. And for obvious reasons, some of BlackBerry's apps don't really work anymore. Even after updating the Play Store and Play Services, I kept on getting this warning about Play Services being out of date. I even let it update, but it doesn't want to for some reason. It keeps on rebooting the whole phone. And when it came to installing the apps I use every day, Twitter for example doesn't support Android 6 anymore. I did the obvious thing of installing the older APK, and I honestly don't know why this phone can't install APKs. Installing apps on this phone took a very very long time for some reason. I spent the whole night trying to install everything. I finally had all my apps and I was ready to begin this challenge. But there is one major problem with this phone, specifically the one I have. I broke the power button. It's my fault. This actually happened about 4 years ago when I tried to tear apart this phone and I accidentally broke the power cable. What a great start. How did I turn on this phone? Well, by repeatedly connecting and disconnecting the charging cable. I don't know how that worked, but it worked. How do I turn off the screen? I used an app to turn off the screen and a double tap turns it back on anyways. Yeah, this challenge is already off to a rocky start, so I'll get back to you in a week. It's been a week and I have a lot to talk about this phone. I can see why this phone failed for BlackBerry. Let's start with the design. It looks basic, it's very understated and it's pretty formal. It's okay. Since it's a phone that was aimed at business professionals, it looks very similar to a lot of older BlackBerries. You know what? This outfit fits the phone. I don't want to wear this. But for a phone that costed $750 at launch, I'm kinda disappointed that it's mostly built out of plastic. Now, plastic isn't inherently bad on a phone. The Lumia 950 was completely built out of plastic. And to some extent, this phone is built well. It's sturdy, it's perfectly weighted, and it feels good in the hand. But this is the Galaxy S6 Edge. It feels way more premium compared to this phone. And both phones were priced similarly, so that's kinda disappointing. Older higher-end BlackBerries often came with premium materials, but not everything is bad with the design. The back has this carbon fiber-like texture. It looks cool, but it is obviously not real carbon fiber. It feels more like a rubbery texture, but that makes the phone super grippy. You're definitely not gonna accidentally drop this phone. And that helps a lot since even though this phone isn't larger than my 13 Pro, I struggled to reach some corners for some reason. It wasn't easy to use with a single hand. It also has a lot of characteristics of 2015 phones. Micro USB, a SD card slot, okay speakers even though they're front firing, obviously the headphone jack, also an extra button in between the volume buttons to toggle silent mode. It almost passes off as a normal phone until you slide out the keyboard. No phone in 2015 had a QWERTY keyboard, and this made the phone pretty unique in its own regard. And it's not just a keyboard, it's also a trackpad that you can use to navigate the phone. I love the mechanism, it's super satisfying to use. Now, I barely use the keyboard to type since I haven't used the BlackBerry in over a decade. Michael Fisher recently made a product called Clicks, which replicates the whole BlackBerry QWERTY keyboard for iPhones for people who miss it. And I've seen people use similar cases for Android phones as well. Let me type out something quickly. A sub to this channel would be fruity. Just like BlackBerry. Wow. Enough about the keyboard, let's talk about the screen. It's one of the best from 2015, very similar to the Galaxy S6 Edge in so many ways. An AMOLED display with good color accuracy and vibrance, somewhat passable for 2024 standards. The brightness is not the best, obviously no higher refresh rate, but surprisingly it's a 1440p display. Also for its time, it was one of the biggest BlackBerry phones and the first and last one to come with a curved display. And that's where every positive take really ends. I kid you not, this phone was a nightmare to use. Calling people wasn't a problem. This ringtone brings me back so much memories. Texting wasn't a problem. Browsing was completely fine after some updates, and Apple Music works. But all of them happened very slowly to a point where it was very irritating to use this phone. Now wait, you might say this phone is pretty slow because it's pretty old. No, it's worse than the Galaxy S6 Edge. Even worse compared to the iPhone 5s from 2013. Most of BlackBerry's apps are pretty broken. Take device search for example. With it you can quickly search up apps or files within the phone. But for some reason, for it to even function, I need an update. When I can't even update the phone in the first place. Even third-party apps take their own sweet time to launch, or even installing them in the first place takes ages. Also, I don't know where else I could add this, but for a phone where its main focus was security, there is no form of biometrics. What? Even the Lumia 950 had Windows Hello. Now I know BlackBerry technically stopped making phones and wouldn't bother supporting a phone that's almost 10 years old. But the Lumia 950 for example worked completely fine in 2023. Every feature works on that phone to this day. And it all comes down to BlackBerry's move to not support this phone for long. Technically, BlackBerry abandoned this phone in 2016 itself because barely anyone bought it. But here's the bigger nail in the coffin. BlackBerry only gave this phone one major update. Yes, one major update. This phone came with Android 5.1, got Android 6 and only got security updates till the end of 2017. Most phones in 2015 got 2 major updates and 3 years of security updates. And this was a move BlackBerry was doing with all their Android phones. Some phones didn't even get major updates. And BlackBerry didn't do this with BlackBerry OS. Those phones got updates for 2 or 3 years, routine security patches. I guess this was BlackBerry's way of indirectly conveying that Android is less secure than their own OS, which doesn't work in their favor because they built this phone in a way where you couldn't root root or mod it. First of all, this phone takes more than a minute to boot up in the first place, and it has nothing to do with performance. BlackBerry ran a lot of security checks at the boot up process to make sure the phone wasn't tampered. You couldn't downgrade this phone at all, something Apple does for security reasons with iOS. Now I've talked about running a custom ROM on the Galaxy S6 Edge and all the good and bad things it opened up with that phone. Every Android phone has had some way to root or custom ROM it, and since BlackBerry focused on security, they didn't allow that to happen with this phone until very recently. Someone finally found a way to flash a custom ROM, but it's also not an easy way. You need to remove the flash memory and then flash a ROM onto it. That's like the hardest custom ROM procedure I've ever heard of.
Wow.
What makes it even more strange is that this phone is based on an AOSP version of Android with some BlackBerry things sprinkled on top of it. They could have easily given this phone Android 7 but decided not to. But let's talk about what BlackBerry added. Since it had a curved display, it had this side panel to show at a glance info, similar to Samsung's Edge panel feature. And every time you charge the phone, it shows a battery indicator at the edge. BlackBerry Hub is a feature they carried straight from BlackBerry 10 where it categorized notifications. I like this feature that's there on the launcher where instead of having dedicated widgets on your home screen, you could swipe up on an app to see them. There were quick shortcuts when you swiped up from the home button. There were some neat interactability features where you could turn around the phone to mute it or make it go sleep with that action. I really needed that with the broken power button. It had a lot of features that were carried straight from BlackBerry's older OS, which is great since those BlackBerry users would feel right at home. Also, I want to add this here since we're talking about software, the on-screen keyboard is pretty amazing. I could quickly swipe up on a predicted text. It had these panels on the left and right for quick access to frequently typed phrases or the number row. But there are a few oddities with this software. I talked about this in the beginning, but some apps just refuse to update, and when they update, they just reboot the whole phone. And this only seemed to happen with the Google Play services and the Google app. I eventually updated Play services with ADB to the most recent version, but it still gives me warnings that Play services are out of date, and Google Maps outright crashed this phone multiple times. Now, software wasn't the only thing that made the whole experience horrible. Sure, Android 6 is 9 years old at this point, but it's also the performance. This phone came with top-of-the-line specs for its time, a Snapdragon 808 with 3 gigs of RAM, pretty standard components for a high-end Android phone. But I've talked about this before and I want to reiterate on this again. The Snapdragon 808 was one of the worst Snapdragon chips of all time. It was so bad that Samsung didn't use it with any of their flagships in 2015. This phone performs horribly in comparison to the S6 Edge. Forget benchmark scores. Day-to-day experiences were horrible with this phone compared to the S6 Edge. And this phone overheated like anything for basic tasks. So much that it gave me constant warnings about this phone being hot. I kinda regret calling the S6 Edge a bad phone in terms of performance. This is just worse. Now, performance isn't gonna matter for business professionals, but for its price, it doesn't make sense. And the cameras also don't matter to the people it was targeted at. But let's talk about it. The Priv had an 18 megapixel optically stabilized camera. BlackBerry never cared about cameras with their phones. They all just did the job. But this is the first one with a higher megapixel count, and also had optics designed by some German company that I've never heard of. Apparently they make Cine Optics. Never heard of them. But wait, this phone had a plastic lens instead of glass that you would find on every high-end phone. Mine has a few scratches already. Now that's weird. The camera is fine. Dynamic range is okay. It seems to take very unprocessed photos and struggles at low light. I'm not gonna bash this phone a lot since cameras weren't a focus for BlackBerry, and it doesn't stack up well compared to the Lumia 950 or the S6 Edge. The camera app seems to be organized well. It even has Pro mode, but the phone takes a while to take photos. The videos are mediocre too. It shoots at 4K, but it's not really good compared to other phones from that era. Let's not even talk about the front camera. It's just a joke. It's a 2 megapixel camera that takes potato quality shots.
And 720p video. I guess the people it was targeted at don't care about the front camera as well.
The battery life was also not great. It had a pretty huge battery, but I only got 3 hours of screen on time at best. And the phone dies once it reaches the 10% mark. Network performance was okay. Sometimes it randomly disconnected from Wi-Fi and refused to connect to 2.4 GHz networks. I guess by looking at all of this, you can tell my experience was pretty horrible. I had slightly higher expectations since this phone ran Android, but this is just the worst old phone I've used. Wait, I want to know how much does the Priv go for? $170? $200? I should have never taken this phone apart. YouTube thinks you like this video or even this video, I don't know.